Professor James had always been fascinated by the mysteries of time. As a leading physicist, he had spent his career studying the subject, and he had finally made a breakthrough. He had created a time machine, and he was ready to test it. As he stood in front of the machine, he felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. He knew that time travel was a delicate matter, and he had to be careful not to disrupt the timeline. But he was also curious, and he couldn't wait to see what the past and future held. James set the machine to ancient Egypt, a place he had always been fascinated by. He climbed inside, held his breath and pressed the button. The machine whirred to life, and James felt himself being pulled through time and space. When he opened his eyes, he found himself standing in the middle of a bustling marketplace. He looked around, taking in the sights and sounds of a civilization long gone. But as he explored the city, James began to realize that something was off. The people seemed different, the buildings seemed newer, and the air seemed cleaner. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, and he didn't know what. As he continued to explore, James discovered that he had indeed changed something. He had disrupted the timeline, and now the course of history was different. The consequences of his actions were catastrophic, and James knew he had to find a way to set things right. But as he tried to return to his own time, James realized that the machine was malfunctioning. He was stuck in the past with no way to get back. And to make matters worse, he was not alone. A rival time traveler, one who had also disrupted the timeline, was hunting him down. James had to use all his knowledge and ingenuity to survive in the past and fix the timeline. But as he navigated the treacherous landscape of ancient Egypt, he realized that the stakes were higher than he had ever imagined. The fate of humanity hung in the balance, and James was the only one who could save it. James knew he had to act fast. He couldn't let the rival time traveler, a man named Marcus, disrupt the timeline any further. He gathered his thoughts and came up with a plan. First, he needed to find a way to communicate with Marcus. He knew they were both time travelers, but he had no idea how to reach him. After some thought, James remembered a trick he had learned from his studies of ancient Egypt. He used a series of hieroglyphics to send a message to Marcus, hoping he would understand. To his surprise, Marcus responded. They agreed to meet at the Great Pyramid, and James was relieved to have a chance to reason with him. But when they met, James realized that Marcus was not interested in reasoning. He was determined to change the course of history no matter the cost. James tried to persuade him, but Marcus was too far gone. In a desperate bid to stop him, James challenged Marcus to a battle of wits. They would solve a series of puzzles, and the winner would get to determine the course of history. Marcus agreed, and the game began. The puzzles were tricky, but James was determined. He used all his knowledge of ancient Egypt to solve them, and slowly but surely, he began to gain the upper hand. But just as he thought he had won, Marcus pulled out a surprise. He had one final puzzle, one that would require all of James' knowledge and ingenuity to solve. James was stumped. He couldn't figure out the answer no matter how hard he tried. And then, just as Marcus was about to declare victory, a strange thing happened. The pyramid began to shake, and a voice boomed from above. "You have both been foolish," it said. "You have disrupted the timeline, and now you must face the consequences." James and Marcus looked at each other in shock. They had never intended to cause so much damage. The voice continued, "But I will give you a chance to fix things. Solve one final puzzle, and the timeline will be restored." James and Marcus looked at each other, and then back at the pyramid. They knew they had to work together if they were going to succeed. And so they put aside their differences and began to work on the puzzle. It was tricky, but with their combined knowledge, they were able to solve it. As they finished, the pyramid stopped shaking, and the voice spoke again. "Well done," it said. "The timeline is restored. But remember, time travel is a serious business. Use it wisely." And with that, James and Marcus found themselves back in their own time, the timeline restored to its original course. James breathed a sigh of relief. He had learned a valuable lesson about the power of time travel, and he was grateful to have made it back in one piece. But as he looked at the time machine, he couldn't help but wonder what other adventures awaited him through the ages. James couldn't resist the temptation to explore more of history. He set the time machine to ancient Greece, a place he had always been fascinated by. He climbed inside, held his breath, and pressed the button. The machine whirred to life, and James felt himself being pulled through time and space. When he opened his eyes, he found himself standing in the middle of a bustling marketplace. He looked around, taking in the sights and sounds of a civilization long gone. As he explored the city, James marveled at the beauty of the architecture and the wisdom of the philosophers. He met Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, and engaged in lively debates with them about the nature of reality and the human condition. But as he delved deeper into the city, James began to realize that something was off. The people seemed different, the buildings seemed newer, and the air seemed cleaner. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, and he didn't know what.